I never imagined a quiet Saturday at the bookstore would change my life. There I was, just another face in the crowd, invisible, unnoticed, until he walked in. A billionaire. His eyes found me, and with a simple phrase, my world flipped upside down. I see you. Before we dive in, hit that like button if you love true love stories that defy expectations, and don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic, heartfelt stories that will leave you breathless. I always start my Saturdays the same way, with a quiet stroll to my favorite bookstore tucked away on a side street that most people overlook. It's the kind of place where the smell of old paper and coffee blends into a comforting hug, where you can spend hours wandering between shelves without anyone rushing you. For me, it's more than a bookstore, it's a sanctuary. I'm just an ordinary black woman, blending into the world as quietly as the gentle hum of a Sunday morning song. I often wonder if anyone really notices me outside of these walls, but here, for a little while, I feel like I belong. The bell above the door jingled softly as I stepped in, and I took a deep breath, savoring the warm, familiar scent of worn pages and polished wood. The store was quiet, the kind of quiet that allows you to hear your own thoughts. I walked past the first rows of books, brushing my fingers against their spines, feeling the textures of stories waiting to be told. There were a few other people scattered around, but none of them paid me any attention. A man bent over a table of novels barely glanced up as I walked by. A young woman perched in the corner with a cup of tea didn't look my way, and even the cashier, busy arranging new arrivals, didn't acknowledge me beyond a polite nod. It's not that I minded, I'm used to blending in, to being overlooked, but sometimes the quiet invisibility hits harder than I'd like to admit. I wandered through the aisles, my fingers tracing the edges of books with care, feeling almost invisible, a ghost among the living. There's a strange comfort in that invisibility, too. No one watches you, no one judges. You can just exist and sink into your own world without interruption. I thought about my life as I drifted between shelves, how ordinary it felt, how predictable, how unnoticed. People often assume because someone is quiet, they're uninteresting. They don't see the thoughts, the dreams, the small sparks of curiosity that exist beneath the surface. And that's exactly how I felt here, unnoticed, quiet, just another figure among the shelves of stories. But as I turned the corner near the philosophy section, I felt a strange pull, a flutter of anticipation I couldn't quite name. It was like the air itself had shifted, like something or someone was about to enter my little world and break the routine. I shook my head slightly, thinking it was just my imagination. Still, there was a ripple in the quiet, a tension I couldn't ignore. Something extraordinary was about to happen. I could feel it, though I had no idea what form it would take. And in that moment, as I stood between the shelves of wisdom and wonder, I had no idea my ordinary Saturday was about to turn into something completely unforgettable. I was drifting down the fiction aisle, lost in the soft rustle of pages and the quiet murmur of other readers, when the door chimed again. I looked up, half expecting another ordinary face, but then I saw him. He didn't just enter the bookstore, he announced himself without a word, a presence that seemed too large for the small space. There was a confidence about him that was impossible to ignore, a kind of effortless energy that made the air feel charged, even in the calm sanctuary I had claimed for myself. He wore a simple outfit, nothing flashy, no gold watches or designer logos, but somehow everything about him radiated success. I noticed how he moved with certainty, how he scanned the room with sharp, deliberate eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. And then, somehow, those eyes found me. For a moment, I froze, caught in the weight of his gaze. It was strange, almost disarming, to feel seen in a way I hadn't in a long time. Not the polite nods or the passing glances that usually brushed past me, but a deep, quiet acknowledgement, as if he could see everything I carried behind my calm exterior. I tried to look away, to hide in my usual invisibility, but something about the way he lingered made it impossible. My heart began to beat faster, a mix of curiosity and something I couldn't quite name. He didn't smile immediately, didn't say a word, yet the way he looked at me felt like recognition, like he had been searching for someone exactly like me in a world full of faces he didn't care to notice. I couldn't help but wonder if I was imagining it, if perhaps he was looking past me at something or someone behind me. But no, when his eyes met mine again, I felt a strange certainty, an unspoken connection that made the rest of the store fade away. People continued to move around us, browsing, chatting softly, completely unaware of the moment that had quietly settled between us. I felt an odd mix of disbelief and intrigue. Who was he? How could someone so confident, so composed, actually notice me? A woman who usually blends seamlessly into the background. And yet, here he was, cutting through the noise of my ordinary world with nothing more than a look. I reminded myself to breathe, to stay grounded, but my curiosity was winning. I felt a flutter of anticipation, a spark of excitement that I hadn't felt in years. Something told me this wasn't just a fleeting glance, a random acknowledgement. There was intention there, a deliberate choice in the way he looked at me, and that tiny detail, that single thread of recognition, made my pulse quicken. I didn't know it yet, but this ordinary Saturday, my quiet sanctuary of books, was about to become the starting point for something extraordinary, something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about attention, desire, and being truly seen. He walked toward me slowly, and I could feel the world narrowing down to just the two of us. Each step he took seemed measured, purposeful, and I couldn't help but notice the calm authority in the way he carried himself. I wanted to look away, to retreat into my usual invisibility, but I couldn't. There was something magnetic about him, something that pulled me forward even as my mind screamed caution. My hands, which I'd been nervously fidgeting with, suddenly felt heavy at my sides. When he finally stopped in front of me, he didn't reach for a handshake, didn't offer the casual smile that most people use to fill awkward moments. He simply looked at me, fully, as if he could see everything behind my careful exterior, the self-doubt, the quiet dreams, the moments I thought no one had noticed. And then he said it, in a voice that was calm but charged with a weight I couldn't explain. "I see you." Time seemed to pause. I blinked, uncertain if I had heard him correctly. He sees me? Really? It felt impossible, absurd even, but at the same time, utterly true. In that moment, the invisible part of me, the part that always stood on the sidelines, felt noticed, acknowledged, validated. I wanted to say something clever, something witty, but all I could manage was a small, startled smile. My heart raced in a way that felt dangerous, like it might betray every composed thought I had spent a lifetime cultivating. He didn't rush me, didn't fill the silence with meaningless chatter. Instead, he gave me space, letting the weight of his words settle around me. I felt an unexpected warmth, as if a window had opened to a part of myself I rarely allowed anyone to see. I wanted to tell him everything, my fears, my hopes, my ordinary life, but I didn't. Somehow, in the simplicity of those three words, everything I had been holding in felt understood. We started talking, slowly at first, about books, about stories, about life. His questions were thoughtful, not just polite conversation, and I found myself answering honestly, freely, like I hadn't done with a stranger in years. Every answer I gave seemed to draw him closer, not physically, but in a way that made the space between us feel smaller, more intimate. I could feel a connection forming, something rare and inexplicable, and it scared me as much as it thrilled me. And yet, even as we spoke, I felt the flicker of disbelief. How could someone like him, confident, successful, unmistakably powerful, actually care to notice me, an ordinary woman, in the quiet corners of a bookstore? I wanted to question it, to dismiss it as some strange coincidence, but deep down I knew it was real. He saw me, not just the surface, not just the smile or the polite nods I usually received, but me, entirely, fully. And in that realization, I felt something shift inside me, a spark of possibility, a sense that my life might just be about to change in ways I couldn't yet imagine. We wandered through the aisles together, our steps slow, almost synchronized, as if the bookstore had somehow rearranged itself around us. I couldn't believe how natural it felt to talk to him. Usually, I'm careful with strangers, measuring every word, guarding every thought. But with him, it was different. I felt safe, seen in a way I never had been before, yet challenged at the same time, like he wanted to know everything about me without ever pressuring me to give it all away. He asked about my favorite books, and for the first time, I didn't just list titles. I explained why they mattered to me. I talked about the characters that shaped me, the stories that had comforted me on lonely nights, the lessons that had lingered far longer than the pages themselves. He listened with an intensity that made me want to reveal even more, but I held back just slightly, savoring the growing curiosity in his eyes, the way he tilted his head as if every word I said was a discovery. There was humor, too, small, unexpected laughs that broke the quiet hum of the store. He had a way of teasing without being cruel, a charm that felt effortless but intentional. I found myself smiling more than I had in weeks, maybe months. I realized I hadn't expected this. The ease, the warmth, the thrill of someone actually caring enough to notice the details of who I was, not just what I appeared to be. He asked questions that made me think, that made me examine the parts of myself I usually ignored. And the more I answered, the more I sensed he wasn't just hearing me, he was understanding me. At one point, I looked at him and wondered how someone so powerful, so commanding, could also be so gentle. It was confusing, almost disorienting. I had always associated success with distance, with people too busy to truly see others. Yet here he was, choosing to spend time with me, to engage with my thoughts, my words, my presence. It made me question everything I thought I knew about the people who notice you and the ones who don't. There was an unspoken tension, too, a pull I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just curiosity or kindness, it was something deeper, something that made my heart beat faster every time our hands accidentally brushed against a stack of books or our shoulders nearly touched as we reached for the same title. I felt my pulse spike in ways that were thrilling and frightening all at once. By the time we reached the end of the aisle, I felt like I had known him far longer than just a few minutes. There was a weight to the conversation, a gravity I hadn't expected, and yet, even in that deep connection, I couldn't shake the thought that this encounter was fragile, like it could vanish as quickly as it had appeared. But for now, in this quiet, dusty corner of the bookstore, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, something extraordinary was beginning. We had been talking for what felt like hours, though I knew it couldn't have been that long. I was wrapped up in the warmth of his attention, the way he listened without judgment, the way every word I spoke seemed to matter. I felt seen, truly seen. And just when I began to imagine that this ordinary Saturday could stretch on forever, reality intruded in the most unexpected way. A soft chime from his phone interrupted the moment, and I watched as his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The ease, the focus, the magnetic pull between us seemed to falter for just a second. I didn't want to ask, didn't want to pry, but I could feel the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darkened with concern or distraction. He murmured a few words into the phone, and suddenly, the world felt heavier, less intimate, less ours. It was the first time I realized that while he had noticed me, he was not untouched by the responsibilities, the obligations, the life that existed outside this small bookstore. For a moment, I felt that familiar creeping sting of being overlooked, the one I had carried with me for so long. Here was a man who had made me feel important, extraordinary, and yet, in an instant, the reality of the world intruded, and I wondered if it had all been just a fleeting illusion. My chest tightened. Was I just a pleasant distraction? A momentary spark in someone else's busy life? I shook the thought away, but the doubt lingered like a shadow. He turned to me, apologizing softly, his eyes still locked on mine. There was sincerity there, a tension between duty and desire, and I realized that life, real life, was complicated, even for someone who seemed to have everything. I wanted to tell him that it was okay, that I understood, but words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded, forcing a small smile, trying to mask the flutter of disappointment and fear. And then it happened. He had to leave. Not tomorrow, not later this evening, but now. The world outside the bookstore called him back, demanding his attention, and I felt the sudden weight of impermanence settle on my shoulders. We exchanged a few hurried words, promises that sounded fragile and uncertain. I watched him walk toward the door, each step taking him further from me and closer to the life that seemed impossibly distant from mine. As the bell chimed again, marking his departure, I felt a strange mix of emotions, excitement, longing, fear, and hope, all swirling together. Something extraordinary had brushed against my ordinary life, and even though it was interrupted, even though he had to leave, I knew that the impact would linger. I could feel it in my chest, in the way my thoughts refused to settle, in the way my heart refused to return to its usual rhythm. I stayed by the bookshelf long after he left, running my fingers along the spines of the novels, trying to ground myself in the familiar. But I knew deep down that nothing would ever feel quite ordinary again. Something had shifted, something had begun, and I had no idea where it would lead. But for the first time in a long time, I wanted to find out. After he left, I couldn't shake the feeling that the world had shifted, even though everything around me stayed the same. The soft murmur of the bookstore, the scent of old paper and coffee, the quiet hum of other patrons. It all felt different somehow, like I was seeing it through a new lens. I kept thinking about him, about the way he had looked at me, the words he had spoken, the spark that seemed to ignite between us in that small space. I see you. Those words repeated themselves in my mind, looping over and over, and I realized how rare it was to feel truly seen in a way that penetrated all the usual walls I put up. I walked home slowly, retracing the path I usually took without thinking, but my mind refused to settle. Every detail of our encounter played back like a vivid movie. The tilt of his head, the way he listened, the little quirks in his smile that made him feel so real and yet somehow larger than life. I couldn't help but wonder if he thought about me in the same way, if the connection we shared had the same weight for him as it did for me. I had never felt so intensely noticed by someone, not even for a fleeting moment, and it left me restless, questioning everything I thought I knew about attraction, attention, and destiny. As the hours passed, I found myself replaying the conversation, analyzing each word, each glance. Did he choose to look at me the way he did? Or was it instinct, something fleeting and unintentional? My mind swung between disbelief and hope, skepticism and longing. For years, I had been invisible in so many spaces, And yet, here was someone who had cut through the crowd and made me feel like I mattered. I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and fear. Exhilaration because someone extraordinary had noticed me, and fear because I didn't want to get my hopes up, not when the ordinary realities of life had a way of crashing back in so quickly. That evening, I found myself checking my phone without realizing it, half expecting a message that might never come. I replayed the moment at the bookshelf where our hands had almost touched, the way his voice had softened when he asked me about my favorite stories. I had expected nothing extraordinary from that quiet Saturday, and yet everything had shifted. It was unsettling and thrilling all at once. I felt the stirrings of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time: hope. I realized that even though he was gone for now, even though the ordinary world had reclaimed him, a part of him had stayed with me. I carried that awareness with me, tucked into the spaces of my day, in the quiet moments when I was alone, in the pauses between the mundane routines that usually defined my Saturdays. Something extraordinary had touched my life, and I couldn't ignore it. I knew that our story, whatever it would become, had begun, and I felt a mixture of anticipation and courage, ready to see where this connection might lead even if I didn't yet know how. I didn't expect to see him again. After that Saturday, I tried to return to my routine, convincing myself that what had happened in the bookstore was just a fleeting moment, a spark that belonged only to that quiet, suspended space. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. I was walking through a small cafe a few blocks from home, carrying my usual cup of tea, when I felt a presence that made my heart skip a beat before I even looked up. And there he was, not just in my peripheral vision, but fully, unmistakably him. He was standing near the counter, casually scanning the menu. But as soon as our eyes met, it was like a jolt of electricity ran through me. My stomach fluttered in a way I hadn't expected, a mix of surprise, delight, and a strange, almost dizzying recognition. How could the universe be this precise, this deliberate, as if it knew exactly what my heart needed before I did? He smiled, subtle, unassuming, yet full of warmth, and suddenly, the weight of the months of ordinary days melted away. It wasn't just a coincidence, it felt intentional, like some invisible thread had pulled us together again. I wanted to run to him, to collapse into the relief and excitement of seeing him, but I held myself back, trying to savor the moment, to let the significance of this reunion sink in. He noticed my hesitation and tilted his head, that same curious, gentle expression I had noticed in the bookstore, like he had been expecting me to be cautious, to protect my heart. We ended up sitting together, not because we planned it, but because somehow it felt inevitable. Conversation flowed as if the time and distance between us had never existed. He remembered every little detail from our first encounter, the books I had been drawn to, the way my eyes lit up when I spoke about stories that mattered to me. It stunned me that someone could be that attentive, that present, and it made me realize how rare it was to be truly noticed, to be remembered in the smallest, most meaningful ways. There was a tenderness in his attention, a patience that made my heart ache with longing. I found myself opening up even more, sharing dreams I hadn't voiced to anyone else, thoughts that I usually kept tucked away. He listened as if my words were the only ones in the world that mattered, and in that space, I felt something shift deep inside me. It wasn't just attraction or curiosity anymore, it was connection, profound and undeniable. As we talked, I realized that this reunion wasn't just chance, it was a second chance at being seen. A reminder that extraordinary moments could exist even in ordinary lives. And as I looked at him, watching the quiet intensity in his eyes, I felt a stirring of hope, a sense that our story, our connection, was just beginning, and that perhaps the universe had plans for us that neither of us could yet imagine. After that unexpected reunion, I walked home with a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in years. The ordinary streets, the familiar corners, the hum of everyday life, they all seemed different, as if the world had shifted ever so slightly, making room for something extraordinary. I realized that the bookstore encounter, and now this chance reunion, had changed something in me. It wasn't just about him noticing me. It was about finally feeling worthy of being noticed, of being truly seen for who I was, and it left me with a quiet but powerful confidence I hadn't known I possessed. I thought back to the first moment he looked at me and said, "I see you." That simple phrase had carried so much weight, more than I could have imagined at the time. It had unraveled the invisible threads I had woven around myself, the ones that kept me blending into the background, the ones that whispered that my presence didn't matter. Suddenly, those threads felt unnecessary, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the freedom to exist fully, to be unapologetically me without fear of being overlooked. It struck me how rare it is to meet someone who notices the quiet, hidden parts of you, who recognizes the person behind the exterior. That realization made me value not just the encounter, but the way I saw myself in response to it. I understood that being seen wasn't only about someone else acknowledging you, it was also about recognizing your own worth, your own beauty, your own significance. And in that reflection, I felt a sense of empowerment that I hadn't expected from a simple Saturday at a bookstore. I also realized how extraordinary moments often arrive quietly, unannounced, in spaces we consider ordinary. A chance glance, a few intentional words, a shared laugh over books we love. These small, fleeting things can shift your world in ways you never imagine. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it, and sometimes it takes someone else seeing you in your entirety to remind you that you matter, that you deserve to be noticed, loved, and celebrated. As I sat quietly that evening, reflecting on the encounters that had changed the rhythm of my ordinary life, I felt gratitude, grateful for the bookstore, for the serendipity of our meeting, and for the subtle courage it had given me to believe in possibilities beyond my usual expectations. I didn't know what the future held, or whether he would remain in my life as a constant presence, but I understood that the experience itself had already transformed me. It had awakened something inside me: hope, openness, and the knowledge that being truly seen is a rare gift worth treasuring. And so I allowed myself to embrace that feeling, to carry it forward into the days and weeks ahead. I realized that even if the story with him remained unwritten, even if life's ordinary routines returned, the spark of being seen, of being noticed, would stay with me. It would remind me of my worth, my presence, and my ability to invite extraordinary moments into an ordinary life. And in that realization, I felt whole, ready, and quietly, wonderfully alive. If this story touched your heart, give it a like, share it with someone who loves a beautiful twist of fate, and subscribe for more stories where love finds you when you least expect it. Comment below. Have you ever been seen in a moment that changed everything?